Hello and welcome to Mastering Dungeons with not Shawn, but our special guest, James Introcaso. Welcome, James. Yay!
Yay! Woo! Thank you for having me, Teos. Woo! It's exciting to be here, and I will do my best to bring Shawn Merwin energy to this podcast.
Yeah, Shawn it up. Fantastic. Well, James, it is a blast to have you. We are going to talk about the usual listener questions. We're going to talk about news, and we're going to get into Draw Steel and the subject of kind of how you introduce a new RPG. And anybody who doesn't know James, I mean, I can't imagine there's got to be somebody out there that doesn't know who you are, but I mean, you did all this awesome work, and then you did things like Dragon Heist, which I'm holding up. You worked on Ghosts of Saltmarsh with really cool like ship rules and things like that. You worked on Kingdoms on Warfare, which I had you as my boss, and you were awesome.
That's right.
Flea Mortals, and you know, I mean, Where Evil Lives, and maybe something else that you've got in the works.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible that you had all. I just ran to go get a prop right before we started recording because something we're talking about later that I want to show off. But you were prepared. You were ready. I wish that I was able to be like Forge of Foes, Ack Inc. Right, they're all on the shelf behind me, but I didn't pull them out.
Anything I can do to validate the things on my shelf, James, is like it's great. I can tell my family, no, I need these things. You don't, it's very important. Yeah,
exactly.
Plus, they're wonderful. They're wonderful books. So it's a delight to have you on here. And what Shawn would say right now is, do you know what else is a delight? Our listeners.
That's right.
And they have some questions which you can help us. And James, we've been talking about nautical campaigns. We just finished a series where Shawn and I went all deep into nautical campaigns. And Nathan Torres 3199 asked us on YouTube, could you explain the difference in how you would prepare this campaign for a home game, this nautical campaign, as opposed to something like an Adventurers League game, which I thought was a really interesting question. So maybe I'll start it out since, this nautical campaign is something that I indeed did spend 3 sessions of the show talking about. We were very much thinking about both something you might publish and write home campaign wise, because that's sort of how our brains always work. And so for anybody who's listened to those episodes, I think that was really our focus, right? Like, I'm doing a home campaign and we've got this idea. And I think we ended up with something like an arc of a zombie or undead apocalypse on this coastal town. And you have to run away in the ship. And now it becomes your ship. And you've got a captain and a minimal crew so that you are elevated. You face in these kind of high seas encounters. You deal with these lost islands and what's on them, maybe facing a foreign power that's also trying to do the same. Maybe they even started the zombie apocalypse somehow. And eventually you got to face off against the Dread King and, put like their heart artifact back inside their ribcage or something. That was kind of the snapshot of it, right? And I think for a home campaign, you can play fast and loose off of that structure. But I'm curious, James, you've worked on a number of organized play, long arcs, and been a part of a variety of organized play. So if you're doing this for AL, if someone said, here's the rough idea, how would you tackle it?
Yeah, it's interesting because the idea of having all of these different places you can go once you have the ship, right? It really actually does, I think, lend itself to organized play pretty well in the sense that, like, sometimes AL stories, right? Shawn and Will Doyle worked on that Eberron story where it's kind of like you got to play these in order, right? And that can also be good as long as you're upfront with those expectations. Or if you're playing a hardcover, right, in AL, the expectation is you're not skipping around from chapter to chapter. You're playing it all, right? But some other AL stories, it's a little bit like. And this is great for convention style play or drop-in playing at a store, right? Where it's like, well, maybe you can make it 1 week, but the next week you're traveling for work right? Yeah. And so it means that, like, hey, everybody starts in this adventure in the zombie apocalypse island, right? Where it's like, okay, and then we get off on the ship, and then your other adventures are, okay, now you're in, you're still in the first tier of play here in AL. There are all of these islands that have different adventures on them, right? That are first tier. And so it's, hey, you show up here and this is your first adventure, and right, and that you can have those, then there's a through line that kind of connects some of the adventures, right, to a big thing at the end. I think that's how I would go about doing it, was, ultimately creating a sandbox of different islands and adventures that people can go around and play in, because then it means, hey, if you're at a convention and there's a time slot for one but not for another, but there, and then later you can play the one that you missed, right? Like that makes it more flexible and easier to do. And so I would be great too if you were trying to run like a West Marches style, right?
That's
game,
super cool,
right? You could do this. I think that's how I would do it. How would you do it for AO?
I love it. Well, this kind of topic came up on our Discord where folks were asking or sort of saying, one of the tough things with AL is if you have this arc, but you miss part of the story arc, then that climb and descent of resolution doesn't pay off well. And what you're talking about with these sort of like missions, or if the arc is a little more like there's more of it's like a zone, right? Like you're going to go to this island and do missions in this. And so if you did all the adventures or some of them, is not the end of the world. But at some point you will have done enough of whatever the goal is to move to the next island and tackle that or whatever. That can help. I think something we did with Ashes of Athos was assume that a person would play the 3-story arc that's at a convention, but not necessarily the others. So we would create summaries of what came before in a 1 page, and you always had to cram it onto 1 page, which was my job. And they'd be like, "Here, new player, you can read this. Here's the story thus far." And then that arc, you would play that. You would assume that you're playing this trilogy of 3, which is what a trilogy is. But you'd play that trilogy, and that would give you a full story that would be satisfying, even if you didn't play anything else. That would help to give it a little bit of read through. But it's tough. You're trying to balance the payoff of investment for those people who have participated, and that someone who steps into it will go, "Oh yeah, it'd be cool to see where this goes," but also not to have it feel like when you missed the second arc that you shouldn't play the third. And that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, of organized play design.
Yeah, it is. It's really hard. The people who have to, as you well know, Teos, when you have to create an entire arc and think about, okay, people are going to play this, and how much access will they have to be able to play this? Right now, it depends on where you live and how, but organized play exists online now, right? Like, and so there's a lot of access to it that I think makes it really great, and the DMs Guild and everything like that. But I do think one of the best things about organized play, right, is getting together, playing in person, and being able to say, last week you played one of these adventures in a totally different place, and now you're at my table, and you sort of have an idea of what's going on, and so does this person over here and this person and that person, right? Even though we all played the other adventures with a different DM at a different table, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Love it. Great question. Our next question is from Grant Paul via Patreon. And he says, the lack of official rules on armor or gear and underwater movement combat puzzles me. I think there were rules in early editions of D&D that prohibited swimming with armor and shields. This seems quite natural. I wonder if the Wizards of the Coast designers think that we can't handle too much realism. Anyway, are you comfortable house ruling armor and water rules, or do you keep such things raw in your games? Ooh, that's a neat question. What do you think? Yeah. You've had to design an entire RPG and decide whether you're going to have underwater armor rules. Does Draw Steel tell you what you can do with your armor and water?
So I would say we're like even less realistic in terms of realism. And part of game design, right, is deciding where you're going to draw that line.
Yeah.
And it's also, right, you have all these constraints that people don't think about, where it's like, well, why didn't you say this? Why didn't you say that? And it's like, well, how much did you want this book to cost? How much did you want the shipping on the book to cost? Right? These are all things that you think about when you're creating a physical book. Can
I interject? That like, for example, when the question says, used to have rules, you could look at those books like, what were the 2 books on like the one that Kim Mohan wrote on wilderness, like survival and dungeoneering, right there, those 2 books. And, entire AD&D books just packed with like outdoor exploration rules. And those books were like super dense. And some people will say, like, I want that in my game. And you go, well, good. That's going to add that thickness to
Exactly.
more almost a half inch to an inch thickness to your dungeon master's guide or player's handbook. Do you actually still really want that, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's a big part of it, right? So when you think about like, hey, like for instance, in Draw Steel, because we have this very heroic game that doesn't focus a lot on dungeon crawling the way Dungeons and Dragons does, right? We don't have a lot of rules for like light and darkness, right? It's kind of like, well, it's either light or dark. You either can see or you can't, right? And that hasn't really hindered our game at all because we don't expect you to engage with that. Whereas D&D has like, hey, if you're holding a torch in one hand, that means something, and means you can't hold a shield or a weapon in that hand. And so and for us, we were like, well, we need more room for this other stuff about like how high can you jump because you're going to be leaping around like the Hulk all over the place and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't blame the designers because I think in a typical D&D campaign, how often are you fighting in the water, underwater? Maybe once a campaign, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you're doing a nautical campaign, right, that becomes different. And that's where I think you want to look to things like supplement. There's tons of supplements you can find on the DM's Guild. Ghost of Saltmarsh has a lot of the like rules for like ship rolls and stuff like that you can find, right? And but I do think that like I absolutely comfortable house ruling stuff, right? Yeah, look at that. That's exactly it. Exactly it. And that's one of the joys. For me, one of the joys of playing role-playing games is like, cool, there aren't rules for this in here, but this is how I'm going to do it, right? Like, there's not really rules for like a hex crawl in 5e necessarily. There's advice about how to run them, but like the rules for a hex crawl are in Tomb of Annihilation because that's the adventure you need them in, right? And so that's like, if they're going to write an underwater adventure, that's probably where they would put those rules then, right? Or that's how I would do it as a designer, I should say.
That's my answer as well, James, to this question. So what I would do is I would not bog down the 5th edition official rules with this because I think it has very little payoff for the space, which is probably the top reason. And I don't know that people would be served by them, right? So like one of the problems is if you start going down that like realism logic, you kind of go like, oh well, I should also be able to sink to the ground faster when I want that to be the case. And I should also, and you just start thinking of all this logic stuff, and you'll never finish, and you'll have 4 pages on it, and most players will never use it. So really what it is, what I would do is in my home campaign, I would ask myself first whether I want to penalize people who are wearing heavy armor. Right? So if I expect this nautical campaign to be one where everybody's dressed like a swashbuckler with, nothing more than leather or hide or something, then I would first of all tell people in the session 0, this is not a heavy armor campaign. And some people will change what character they play. Right?
Yeah.
And so that's an important expectation. And then if I really did state that, then I can put in some things like, well, for the people who decide to wear the heavy armor and chance it anyway, here are some scenes that challenge you, but don't make it like super punishing. But it gets hard. You have to have those payoff questions of whether it's really making the game more fun or not. And even in that kind of a homebrew thing, it might not be worth it. Probably the only thing I would do is just have a few challenges where those in heavy armor are maybe challenged by something like fighting a current or some kind of water struggle kind of scene as just color, the way I might pick on ranged characters in another fight or casters in a different one, just as a way of pressuring them, but not as a ground rule, because then it becomes penalizing. And
yeah, exactly. I agree with you completely, and I like. For me, I think it's always about asking, right? Realism, I think, is important as long as it's in service of the fun, and fun is kind of the that's at the top, right? That's the thing you want to aim for most. And for a lot of people, hey, being really realistic might be a fun thing, but I don't think that's actually true for most people. I don't think most people want to spend time thinking about like, okay, well, hang on, I want to jump in the water to save this drowning person. It's not very dramatic if we stop for a full minute while I take off all of my armor, right?
Or the hard
sort
condition
of kills the momentum of the story and everything.
The hard condition that a swim rule or whatever underwater rules can be. Like when we played Shadow Dark and we ran a gauntlet, one of the things that happened is they slowly amassed all of this treasure. So they now felt like, oh, you know what? Even if our characters die, The next ones can find our bodies, and we will probably stop dying as much. And then they swam.
Oh no.
And they realized how rough the swimming
Not in
rules
Shadow
are.
Dark.
And they went down, they died, and all of their stuff was at the bottom. And so the next characters were like, well, we can't possibly swim down to get it. So we now have to deal with the dungeon with none of the resources that all of the other pre-characters had slowly amassed. And that's when I said, you know what? Let's make first level characters.
Oh, that's incredible. That's I love that. That was like, oh, well, this is so punishing. We shouldn't even try to swim.
No, there was like, well, that treasure's gone. And it was great
Yeah.
treasure, right? Like a magic thing and whatever, and torches, everything. And it's just like, they just looked at it and went, yeah, nope.
Yeah, that sure is down there. Sure is down there. They'd sooner get a straw and try to drink all of the water, right, than go down there and get it. That's hilarious.
Exactly. Yep. And, one could say, well, maybe they could have thought of some clever way to get it, or, entice some sea creature or something. And in a longer campaign, we would have explored those options for sure. But at a very simplistic level, it was, okay, we have hit water rules that are just going to murder us. So we're done. We're out.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't want to engage with them anymore, right? Which is, I think, why you've seen a lot of games that even tend towards realism try to simplify sort of the accounting end of things, right? Shadow Dark does slots instead of figuring out the weight of everything that you carry, for instance, because it's just like, look, this is easier. It may not be quite as realistic, but it gets the job done much faster and everybody loves it, right? So that's the better way to do it.
100 Dungeons does it too. Yeah, it's a great way to do it. Just simplify it to some and based on your strength or whatever it is, and it's way better. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you to everybody who sent us questions. You can get questions to us at masteringdnd@gmail.com. Find us in real life. Ask on YouTube. Ask on the Patreon. All the ways work. And we have even another question for next week. So now to our news and commentary. And James, always warms my heart. The Diana Jones Award has announced their emerging designers. We have 4 emerging designers announced. Ashraf Braden, who's an African RPG designer living in Uganda's Kampala district, known for Legends of Uganda, which is a zine. Also working on Dungeon Crawl Classics. Elliot Davis in Brooklyn, a game designer, publisher, podcaster, and artist who loves all things weird and wonderful about the TTRPG industry. Project Echo, rom-com drama bomb, and the upcoming The Time We Have. That last one, the penultimate, was a great name. Marceline Lehman, a graduate of and instructor at the prestigious NYU Game Center. She's designed in the board game and RPG space. North Star Games, Underdog Games, and Clarkson Potter, title unannounced for that one. The other ones are the Ocean Solo Mode and Trekking the World 2nd Edition. And then Lila McBeath Fujiwara is the project lead for the Cosmere RPG, and an all-around awesome person and Mastering Dungeons fan.
Yeah, she's great.
In 2024, the Cosmere RPG became the highest funded tabletop Kickstarter ever, and she coordinates a team of 20 diverse creatives working on 14 game products, and is the book lead for the RPG's hardcover campaign-length adventures Stonewalkers and Mistborn Legacy. So congrats to all of those, and we also want to say, speaking of Lila, she just updated her blog, which you can find at jarofeyes.substack.com. And there, her latest blog is all about how to fulfill PDFs for crowdfunding. And she used itch.io and DriveThru to fulfill PDF for the Jukebox Karaoke RPG, and shares everything that she's learned about the process. So, very cool.
Yeah. Stuff like that is so invaluable when people are sharing, right? Because there's so much about RPGs that people come in kind of understanding even if they've played them, right? Because running an RPG, you engage in a little game design to begin with.
Yep.
But things like, the business end of it, right, is so hard for people to figure out, and it's sort of elusive, and it's not like you can even go take a course at the local community college all the time, right? So although I'll shout out to Storytelling Collective, right, that does help people get there. And having posts like this that really help people get there is cool. And Lila is just one of the best. I was so excited when I saw this about the Diana Jones Award. So awesome.
Super
awesome
kind, super creative. You can catch Lila at GameholeCon. Love seeing her there. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And next on our news item is the Daggerheart Media Blitz. I don't know any other way to say this. Darrington Press has released what is almost a Wizards-like deluge of previews of Daggerheart, their RPG that is by now, I'm recording the 19th with James, but it releases tomorrow, May 20th, so you have already reached release date by the time your ears are enjoying the show. We saw Screen Rant with previews of the Hope and Fear section. Games Radar previewed the Witherwild campaign setting frame. And then Game Informer had a preview of the Age of Umbra campaign frame. And that campaign frame, Matt Mercer is going to be running an 8-part mini-series set there. There's a session 0 on May 22nd, and then the first full episode on May 29th. Thoughts about this, James?
Awesome. So full disclosure, right? I got a pre-release copy, so I have it here in my hands. It's still in the shrink wrap. They said that I could show off the box, so here I am showing off just the box, not no other part of it. Yeah, it's I think it's great. I think it is wonderful that we have an RPG coming out that people are really excited about, that clearly has a lot of power behind it, and also seems like it is going to have a really good community around it. I'm always thinking about, like, how's this going to be for creators, right? And it seems like that there probably is going to be a pretty good creator community around this, people who seem really excited about it and stuff. So and I for a long time, I personally was avoiding looking too closely at Daggerheart because we were making our own fantasy RPG over at MCDM, right? And I didn't want to read something and be like, that's so good, I must have it, let me take it, right? And if there were things we did at the same time, I wanted to be able to say, like, we came by it honestly, right? And so now that Charles Steele is going into edit and layout and stuff, I feel great, and I'm reading it and I'm like, oh, this is they're totally different games, by the way, in terms of rules. Totally different games, and totally awesome. It's a really, really great game, and if what you want to do is be able to sit down and tell a really good fantasy story with your friends, Daggerheart, I think, is going to become a lot of people's game of choice, and that to me is very, very exciting to see. And the art, it's like a really good looking game,
really good,
really good looking game,
really amazing.
Yeah.
I wish I had.
How about you? What do you think so far?
Yeah, so I've played it, and we spent a couple of episodes talking about it. I liked it a lot. It's a game that underwent a lot of transformations. You're used to this, really, but it transformed a fair bit. Even after playtesting ended, we heard about sort of changes going on, and so I'm very curious to see how that final form came. I also think it's a really fascinating game of blending kind of sink your teeth into it, things your character does, but then places where it says, oh, and be really storytelling.
Right.
And that can be hard to balance. And so I'm curious, as people begin to play it and that community forms around it, how that play will be. To what extent, are they really like coming up with a world together? And one of the things it says is, sort of don't prep more than a session in advance, right? So you're playing off your characters. And are people really doing that? I'm curious to see how that all plays out. But I love the advice that was in the book, and so I'm glad for people to get their hands on it. Looking forward to it. I have a PDF copy which I have not looked at yet, but I will be doing that this week.
Yeah, for the person, I feel like so many people are coming to Daggerheart and other games who have only ever played D&D, and many of them have only ever played one edition of D&D, right? Or two, depending on how many 5th editions you think there are. What they're coming to with is a set of expectations that is based on that one game. Yeah. And so I like that Daggerheart is saying to people, hey, we should be changing X, Y, and Z about it, right? Like we should change these things, or not change, right? But these are the ways you should be thinking differently about our game, right? Is probably the better way to say it. And so I think being that direct with people is good. Now it becomes a question of, will people embrace that newness, right? And I think that is a question we wrestle with, and I would say we're closer to 5e than Daggerheart is in many of our rules. And it's still a question of, like, will people just be willing to say, okay, this is different, and I can see why. And maybe if we do it together, I will actually have the experience that I am looking for. Because I do, when I read Daggerheart, there's a lot of people that I've played with who I think like they would like this better, right? Like they personally would probably like this better. But they have 10 years of playing D&D that now they need to put aside as they play this new game, right? And that's hard to do.
This is great. We're going to talk about this very subject in our main segment, so I'm excited for that. We'll leave some of that for that. Next up is on the hiring side. Brotherwise Games is hiring an RPG department director for the Cosmere RPG. And they say in the announcement, we're seeking a senior producer to oversee the development, publishing, and brand management of our role-playing game line. It'll focus initially on the launch of our new Plot Weaver game system. Will grow to include responsibility for the entire RPG department, including the record-breaking Cosmere RPG. Ideal candidate has experience leading creative teams, success in bringing RPG products to market, with a preference for launching new systems or brands, experience marketing RPG brands, and proven ability to manage large projects. It's a remote work position, somewhat flexible hours, but with expectations of you checking in and showing that you're there all the time and being able to respond. Salary of $100K, bonus target of 15% on that. Benefits include health, vision, and then they say dental. There are laws in various regions that make it so they maybe can or can't. So they may be able to give you dental depending on where you live. So the job is posted on LinkedIn, link in our show notes. That would be a fantastic job. That'd be really fun. Yeah,
it's really cool. And it's, I know a lot of people who have worked on the Cosmere RPG, right? Oh, we were just talking about Lila.
Yep.
And it seems like it's a group of great people who they get to work with them on their different projects and stuff. So, very exciting for somebody to get that for sure.
Awesome. Our last news item is a blog article, Storytelling Through Violence. This is on the blog, thenovelgamemaster.com, where Shannon R. discusses the game Mothership. And I thought this was interesting because they discuss how at first blush Mothership is often seen as or treated like an OSR type game, but it's more of a story game during its combat phase. And the breakdown of this is pretty thought-provoking, so here it goes. In a violent confrontation, time is split into 10-second intervals called rounds. Everything in a round happens basically at the same time. So it's not initiative order, it's all at once in that round. The warden, the game master, describes the situation and what is likely to happen if no one responds. Then you go around the table, each player says what they are doing to react to this situation. Once they understand the stakes and what they want to do, players have committed to that action, right? They might have questions or something, but now they say, here's what I'm doing. The warden resolves all actions at once, calling for stat checks or saves as needed. After those rolls are made, damage and wounds are rolled, and finally the warden describes the new situation and the next round begins. And so that part of the procedure is what results in this very story-focused approach. And they have a description here, James, that's kind of cool, where a monster, a carcinid, is attacking. And Shannon, in the example, kind of talks about the way that they ran this was something like this massive carcinid is skittering towards Jones, one of the characters, its claws ripping up chunks of earth with its passage. If it reaches Jones, it will try to rip them limb from limb. What do you do? So players might ask questions of like, how far away is it from me? Can I get to this thing? That kind of thing like that. And then once that is done and they've chosen their actions, the DM describes and says, okay, one character, Big Mike, is working to assemble the bomb. It's going to take D6 roll 3 rounds to complete. Raven, you're firing at the carcinid. Roll a combat check. Player rolls, fails. Okay, you aim your combat shotgun, squeeze the trigger, weapon jams, take a point of stress. The monster is hurtling towards Jones. Jones, give me a speed test to see if you can pry up the floor panel. You pry it up. You dive through into the shadowy darkness below. A half second later, a razor-sharp span of the claw punches through the floor panel above you, right? And this kind of idea. Awesome. I thought that was really neat. I played Mothership just once. I don't know that I quite had this sort of an experience, and now I want to play it all over again. What did you think about all this, James? I spoke for a long time there.
So I love, first of all, right, like I think this is one of those things, right, where we get used to the idea of like combat happens in rounds and turns, and in a turn everybody says what they're going to do, and we act in some sort of order that is determined by our character stat or speed or a dice roll or whatever, right? So to have this idea of and a long time ago, I worked on a role playing game called Burn Bright,
Yeah.
that is a science fantasy role playing game where it's a similar thing at the beginning of the round. The person running the game, right, the game master says, "This is what these people are trying to do right now," right? And then the players do have a turn order that they act in. They kind of get to pass it back and forth and do different stuff, and they get to establish things. And so, but you essentially can take roles to try to prevent them from doing. Hey, they're going to shoot at you. I dodge, right? Hey, I would actually like to get in there and try to rip the gun out of their hands right before they shoot this laser blast at me. So having this sort of system that it does feel very narrative to say, this is what the enemy is doing, and this is what will happen if you are not there. But you are there, so what do you want to do to try to stop it? I love that idea of because, and then you get to see how the narrative changes because of this. Well, okay, Jones gets to run down there, and now this alien is trying to rip through the floor to get to them. For me, that's really cool. I love seeing when people are like, let me reject what we normally do and try to make it work this other way. And it doesn't feel, I understand why people say Mothership feels very OSR. I feel like anything that comes in a small booklet and is dark and gritty, people are going to be like, that's like the OSR for good reason.
Character will probably die. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But for sure, there's reasons that this also feels like a more narrative thing. And it's a nice blend of them. And I like that.
I like this. It made me think of two things. One was Patchwork Paladin had a blog today that was thought-provoking about Cairn and how Cairn does these saving throws, and which kind of leads you to avoid damage. And the effect this has on players where they may think to their characters kind of like, instead of making the roll to get through the corridor full of caltrops, they say, can I pry a piece of wood from off of this thing and then just put it above them so there's no check at all. And that kind of becomes the win condition. And what Patrick Paladin was saying is that in their campaign, they've run, I think, 8 sessions of this. What they're finding is some of the players are like, I don't want to play like I don't want to avoid everything. I actually want to make checks and best things, maybe a little more heroic or cinematic versus like, well, then I, put wood on top of the caltrops and bypass the need for check. And they give various examples of what I thought was interesting. The other thought I had was that this idea of the DM kind of describing what happened during the round feels a lot like those episodes of Community. If you ever watch those, where it's like he's rolling everything, right? The DM is rolling everything for everybody and saying what happens, which is great for TV because it's like, James, your hero scales the wall, takes 3 damage from the goblins. You try to get over the wall, but you fall. Your friend and you roll, and it's like all this this narrative where almost like the players almost don't have agency because it's being made for TV, but it sounds great. It's so fun. The rapid fire nature is very exciting. It made me think of that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It definitely has that sort of community feel of like, this is what's happening, and this is, and I like there's this chance for the players to really understand the stakes. It feels like sometimes when we talk about games like D&D, it's like, well, you should be hinting that the monster would tear Jones limb from limb. But to be able to just say it, right? Like, this is what it will happen if you don't do this. It's like, oh, okay. Well, now, that sets everybody into motion in a really great way that I think feels fair too, right? Like, it makes the game feel more fair because if that happens, it's like, well, you were warned, right? It wasn't a misinterpreted hint. It wasn't you were told Jones is going to die if this doesn't work.
And I think games that do try to have a little more of that old school feel are often digging into that idea of this thing will, can be in over your heads. It can be absolutely lethal if you don't do the proper things. And so let's have clever play here, right? And that is nice to have versus like everything is balanced for CRs and stuff. Sure.
Exactly. And I think it makes the players then feel empowered to also play unfairly, right? That they don't need to then say, okay, well, I should be doing this, right? I should have this right level of longsword and this sort of that. And it's like, no, go get in that, heavy lifting mech armor and try to tear this alien apart. And might be an unfair fight, but that's fine because before you got in that armor, it was an unfair fight too, right?
Exactly.
Just the other side.
Exactly. That's great. Love it. All right. Well, that was all of our news. So stay tuned for our main topic.